On a stormy night by the edge of the sea, a pregnant woman flees from everything she once called home. Exhausted and afraid, she finds shelter beneath an old lighthouse, its beam flickering like a heartbeat in the dark. Inside lives a lonely keeper, an aging man haunted by the ghosts of the family he once lost to the waves. Yet, when he opens his door to the stranger, something miraculous begins. One seeking refuge, the other seeking forgiveness. Neither of them knows that this meeting will change their lives and that of an unborn child forever. But what secret has the sea kept all these years beneath the light of Windmere? Before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from tonight? The sea was not roaring that night. It was howling. Waves struck the black cliffs like furious fists, and the wind clawed at the old lighthouse that stood alone on the edge of the world. Rain lashed against its stone walls, rattling the rusted shutters as if begging to be let inside. Beneath that chaotic sky, a small car crawled along the coastal road, its headlights flickering through curtains of rain. Inside sat Clara Duval, 28, 7 months pregnant, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She had been driving for hours without rest, her face pale, her dark hair plastered to her cheeks with sweat and tears. Once, she had been beautiful in a quiet, bookish way. Soft features, fair skin, eyes the color of stormy sea glass. But now she looked like a shadow of herself, worn down by fear and exhaustion. Every mile she put between herself and the city felt like a small victory, but also a question. Where can I possibly go now? Her husband Daniel, a man once charming enough to make promises sound like poetry, had become her nightmare. His hands, once gentle, had turned cruel. His voice, once warm, had become a weapon. The last night she saw him, he had thrown a glass that shattered inches from her belly. That was when she ran, took the car, the few dollars hidden in a jar, and the single photograph of her mother. The storm had been rising ever since, as if following her. When the car skidded on the slick road and the engine sputtered its last, Clara's heart sank. The headlights blinked once, then died, leaving her in total darkness. Only the sound of the ocean remained, relentless, merciless. She tried the ignition again, whispering, "Come on, please, not now." But the car answered with silence. Cold wind forced its way through the cracked window, smelling of salt and metal. That's when she saw it. Far ahead, through the rain and the mist, a faint pulse of light sweeping rhythmically across the horizon. A lighthouse. She left the car, clutching her coat over her belly. Each step up the rocky path was a battle. Her boots slipped on wet stones, and the cold cut through her like knives. Her body trembled from exhaustion, but some instinct stronger than reason kept her moving toward that light. It was the only sign of life in a world that seemed determined to bury her. By the time she reached the door, her hands were shaking too hard to knock. She pressed against the wood, calling weakly, "Hello? Is anyone?" The door creaked open before she finished. Standing in the doorway was Elias Carrick, the lighthouse keeper. He was tall, taller than any man she'd seen in years, with a frame still broad despite age. His beard was silver gray, trimmed close but wild at the edges, and deep lines marked his weathered face like maps of every storm he'd ever faced. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, the kind that saw everything but revealed nothing. He wore an old fisherman's sweater and heavy boots, both patched many times. The scent of salt and oil hung around him, and when he spoke, his voice was gravelly but calm. "You'll freeze to death out here," he said simply, stepping aside. Clara hesitated, torn between fear of strangers and the raw need for shelter. But the warmth spilling from the open doorway was too much to resist. She crossed the threshold, dripping water onto the wooden floor. The interior was dimly lit, filled with the quiet hum of an old generator and the scent of burning kerosene. A fire burned low in a stone hearth, and beside it lay a sleeping dog, an elderly sheepdog with a gray muzzle and one cloudy eye. It raised its head, sniffed the air, then wagged its tail once before settling again. "His name's Bramble," Elias said, noticing her glance. "He's old and mostly deaf, but he means well." Clara murmured a faint, "Thank you," as Elias hung her soaked coat by the fire. He moved with the slow assurance of someone used to silence, to solitude. "You shouldn't be out in weather like this," he said. "I didn't have a choice," she whispered. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze softening when he noticed her rounded belly. "You'll catch your death," he muttered, then pointed to a chair near the fire. "Sit. I'll make tea." The kettle hissed as he worked. Clara's eyes roamed the small room, the wooden walls lined with old books and maps, the oil lamps, the sea charts pinned above the desk. Everything about this place felt untouched by time. Yet beneath the peaceful order, she sensed something heavy, like the air after a thunderclap. She wondered how long this man had lived alone here, keeping watch over storms and ships that never came. When he handed her the steaming mug, their fingers brushed. His hands were rough, the kind that had known both creation and destruction. "Name?" he asked. "Clara," she said. "Clara Duval." He nodded slowly. "Elias Carrick, keeper of Windmere Light, though no one calls it that anymore." She tried to smile. "You live here alone?" He gave a short nod. "Me and Bramble haven't had visitors in, well, longer than I care to count." "And yet you stay?" "Someone has to keep the light burning," he said. "It's what I promised." They talked little after that. Clara sipped the tea, warmth creeping back into her fingers, while Elias stoked the fire. Outside, the storm raged on, the wind howling around the lighthouse like a living thing. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her. He showed her to a small spare room upstairs, a narrow bed, a lamp, and a window that faced the sea. "Rest," he said simply. "We'll figure things out in the morning." She tried to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. As she lay down, the rhythmic sweep of the lighthouse beam passed through the window every few seconds, washing the room in pale light. The sound of the storm became distant, almost like a lullaby. Sleep came slowly, filled with uneasy dreams, waves crashing, voices calling through static, and a child crying somewhere she couldn't reach. Then, in the middle of the night, something woke her. The room was silent now. Even the storm had eased. She heard it again, a soft voice singing, low and sweet, the kind of melody only a mother would hum to her baby. It was coming from above, from the lamp room at the top of the tower. Her pulse quickened. She slipped from the bed, careful not to wake Bramble, who now slept outside her door. The old dog gave a soft whine, but didn't move. Step by step, Clara climbed the spiral staircase, the cold metal railing biting her palm. The song grew clearer with every step, words indistinct but full of sorrow. At the final landing, the door to the lamp room stood slightly open. The beam of light turned slowly, painting the walls in arcs of white. Clara pushed the door with trembling fingers. The room was empty. Only the great lens rotated steadily, its mechanism clicking softly. The singing had stopped. She stepped closer, her breath visible in the cold air. The wind outside had died completely. Everything was still, too still. Then she noticed something on the floor near the lamp. A single footprint, small, bare, and wet, as if someone had just walked through the sea and disappeared. The beam swept past again, and for the briefest instant, Clara thought she saw a reflection in the glass. A woman holding a baby, smiling through the light before fading into darkness. Clara did not sleep again that night. She sat by the narrow window of her small room, her hands wrapped around a cup of cold tea, staring at the faint dawn that crept across the sea. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so profound that even the waves seemed hesitant to disturb it. The sky was a dull gray, streaked with gold, where the sun tried to break through. From her window, she could see the lighthouse beam fading as daylight claimed the horizon. Somewhere above, the lamp stopped its rotation with a mechanical sigh, and the sea settled into its slow rhythm of breathing. She could still feel the chill of that upper room in her bones, and the memory of the wet footprint gleamed like something carved into her mind. When Elias appeared at her door, he looked older than the night before, more worn, as if the storm had taken something from him too. He carried a small tray, oatmeal, tea, and a slice of bread, thickly spread with honey. "You should eat," he said, his voice calm but watchful. "The morning will take your strength if you let it." She thanked him quietly and hesitated before asking, "Did you go up to the lamp room last night?" His eyes, pale and unreadable, paused on her face before he looked away. "No. Once the light's steady, I leave it be until morning." "Why?" Clara's lips parted, but she couldn't bring herself to say the words I heard singing. It sounded foolish, like something a frightened child might imagine. Nothing, she murmured. I must have dreamed it. Elias said nothing for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Dreams can feel real out here, he said finally. The sea has a way of making people see what it wants them to see. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. If you plan to stay a while, there's wood that needs stacking, keeps the body busy, keeps the mind steady. And then he was gone, moving with that quiet efficiency that seemed to belong more to the lighthouse than to any living man. Bramble followed Clara out into the yard later that morning, his slow gait matching her own cautious steps. The old dog's coat, though matted in places, shimmered silver under the pale sun. He moved stiffly but loyally, always keeping her within sight. Clara found the pile of driftwood Elias had mentioned beside a weathered shed. Each piece was rough, salt-stained, and heavy with damp. She worked slowly, placing them in neat rows along the wall. Her movements were awkward. Pregnancy had changed her center of gravity, and the ache in her back reminded her she was not as strong as she wanted to be. Still, she felt better doing something, anything, to occupy her thoughts. The lighthouse stood tall above her, its stones still glistening with rain. From this angle, she noticed something she hadn't before, etched letters faintly visible just below the lantern room's base. Time and weather had nearly erased them, but she could make out the last word, Mary Ann. The name caught in her chest like a whisper she almost recognized. Elias joined her near midday, carrying a small metal bucket filled with tools. You work harder than most who come through here, he said, without looking up from his task of tightening a rusted bolt on the outer railing. Most people spend their first day complaining about the cold or asking about town. There's a town? Clara asked, surprised. 1/2 mile inland, Gull Haven. Small, quiet, mostly fishermen and widows. They mind their business. He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. If you need supplies or see the doctor, that's where you'll go. At the mention of a doctor, Clara felt a flicker of relief. I might need that for the baby. Elias nodded, though his expression turned distant for a moment. Dr. Alcott still runs the practice. Been doing it longer than I've been keeping this light. You'll find he asks too many questions, but he's harmless. That afternoon, when the air had softened and gulls began to circle lazily above the cliffs, Clara decided to explore a little. The interior of the lighthouse fascinated her. Its circular staircases, the brass fittings polished by age, the faint smell of salt and oil that clung to everything. Every wall seemed to hum faintly, as though the sea itself breathed through the stone. On the second floor, she found a closed door that hadn't been mentioned before. The knob was old brass, cold to the touch. Curiosity overrode hesitation. She turned it gently. The room inside was small, almost forgotten. Dust motes floated in the air like slow-moving snow. Against one wall stood a narrow iron bed, covered in a faded quilt, and beside it, a wooden cradle draped with cobwebs. A small window looked out over the sea, its glass warped by salt and time. On a desk near the bed lay a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and softened with age. When she brushed away the dust, she could just make out the name embossed faintly on the front, Mary Ann Carrick. Clara's breath caught. Carrick, the same as Elias. She hesitated, then opened the book. The first pages were filled with neat handwriting, the ink faded but legible. The entries were domestic, almost peaceful. Notes about the weather, the tides, the meals cooked, and the maintenance of the lamp. But as the pages went on, the tone changed. The handwriting became hurried, slanted. One entry read, "The sea keeps calling. I hear it in the wind at night. Elias says it's my imagination, but I know better. She wants her child back." Clara felt a chill creep down her spine. She wants her child back. She flipped further ahead, and near the end of the book found a final line scrawled across the page in uneven strokes. If anyone finds this, forgive him. The same phrase she had seen faintly scratched under the lantern room window. Forgive who? She whispered. A voice behind her made her jump. That room isn't for visitors. Elias stood in the doorway, his face half-shadowed. His expression wasn't angry, but something far heavier, sorrow maybe, or dread. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. You shouldn't go digging into ghosts, Clara. They don't like being disturbed. I didn't mean to pry, she said quickly, clutching the journal. I saw her name, Marianne Carrick, was she? He took the book gently from her hands. My wife. Clara swallowed hard. What happened to her? Elias ran a rough thumb along the book's spine before setting it back on the desk. The sea took her, he said simply. Long time ago. Some losses you don't speak of because speaking makes them real. He turned to leave, but Clara noticed how his hand lingered on the cradle's edge before he walked out. There was tenderness in that touch, but also something like guilt. That evening, Elias didn't light the fire in the hearth as usual. He sat by the window instead, smoking a pipe carved from dark wood, his face hidden by the dim light. Clara joined him quietly. I'm sorry, she said. About your wife. He nodded but didn't look at her. You can't live near the sea and not lose something to it. That's the bargain. After a moment, he added, The light keeps others safe. That's enough for me now. When night fell, the sea outside glowed faintly under a sliver of moon. Clara found herself unable to stop thinking about Marianne's journal, about the last line, forgive him. What had Elias done that required forgiveness? Sleep refused to come. Around midnight, she got up, pulled on her shawl, and crept down the stairs. Bramble stirred but didn't rise. The old dog's cloudy eye tracked her movement, tail twitching once before falling still. The lighthouse was eerily quiet. Even the creaks of the timbers seemed to hold their breath. She stopped by the main room, where a large painting hung on the wall, something she hadn't noticed before in daylight. It was a portrait of a young woman standing beside the very same lighthouse. She had long auburn hair pinned in an old-fashioned twist, skin as pale as milk, and eyes the color of moss after rain. There was gentleness in her face, but also an unspoken sadness. At her feet stood a little girl of about 5, holding a seashell to her ear. The child's smile was wide and bright, the kind that made you feel the world couldn't possibly be cruel. But someone, at some later time, had taken a knife or a nail and scratched out the little girl's face. Clara's stomach knotted. She reached out, her fingers tracing the jagged lines. Who were you? She whispered. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. She turned sharply. No one was there, only the slow swing of the lantern above and the distant sound of the tide retreating. She exhaled shakily and turned back toward the stairs, but froze. The cradle from the upstairs room was there, sitting in the corner of the main hall. She had left it untouched earlier, covered in dust. Now it looked clean, freshly polished, and it rocked gently, as though soothed by invisible hands. Clara's heart thudded painfully. She stepped closer, one trembling hand reaching out. The air grew colder the nearer she came. The cradle stopped moving abruptly, as if sensing her. In the silence that followed, a faint scent of salt and lavender filled the air. It was comforting for a moment, then overwhelming. Marianne, she whispered before she could stop herself. A whisper seemed to answer from the stairwell. He promised the light would keep us safe. The voice was soft, feminine, threaded with sadness. Clara spun toward the sound, but the stairs were empty. Her breath came shallow and fast. Then from above, a sharp metallic click echoed. The sound of the lamp mechanism restarting. The beam of the lighthouse began to turn again, though no one was operating it. Its glow swept through the window, spilling light across the cradle. Inside it, just for an instant, Clara saw a small seashell resting where a baby's head might have been. She touched it hesitantly. It was cold, wet, and smelled like the ocean. A door slammed above, and she jumped. Elias's voice came from the stairwell, low and edged with something she couldn't read. What are you doing down here? Clara turned to face him, clutching the shell. The light, it's moving again. I thought it was off. Elias's face went pale, the color draining from him like water from a stone. It shouldn't be. He pushed past her, moving with surprising speed for his age, and climbed the stairs 2 at a time. Clara followed despite herself, fear and curiosity tangled together. At the top, the lamp burned bright and steady, flooding the room with blinding light. Elias stood frozen, staring at it. It's not possible, he muttered. I shut it down. The power's cut. Clara's gaze drifted to the far side of the room, and she gasped. There, on the glass, a faint imprint had appeared. The outline of a woman's hand, fingers splayed as if pressing from the other side, and beneath it, written in the condensation, a single word. child. Elias backed away slowly, his face a mixture of terror and recognition. "Mary Ann," he whispered, his voice cracked, not from fear, but from grief. Then, as suddenly as it began, the light went out. The beam stopped turning, plunging them into silence. Only the faint ticking of the cooling metal remained. Elias turned to Clara, his expression distant. "Go to your room," he said quietly, "and lock the door." She wanted to protest, to demand an explanation, but something in his tone stopped her. It wasn't anger, it was protection. She obeyed, descending the stairs with trembling legs. When she reached her room, Bramble was lying across the doorway as if standing guard. She sank to the floor beside him, still clutching the seashell, listening to the creak of the old tower above. Hours passed. The sea outside whispered against the rocks. Somewhere in the distance, the faintest sound of a lullaby drifted through the air, soft, familiar, and heartbreakingly sad. And though she knew she was alone, Clara felt the warmth of a hand brush her shoulder, followed by a voice she could barely hear. The light must never go out again. The following morning broke gray and muted, as though the world itself were holding its breath after the night's strange events. The sea stretched calm and endless beneath a sky the color of dull steel. Clara stood by her window, one hand resting on her belly, feeling the faint kicks of the child within her. It was both comforting and terrifying, a reminder that something innocent still depended on her, even in a place that now felt haunted by sorrow. She hadn't slept. Every creak of the lighthouse, every whisper of wind against its stone walls, had felt alive, as though the tower itself was keeping watch. Elias had not spoken to her since the incident with the lamp, and she hadn't dared to approach him. When she finally stepped out of her room, the smell of salt and burning oil greeted her. Elias was already awake, tending to the lamp's mechanism with mechanical precision. He looked gaunt, the skin around his eyes drawn tight, his gray beard unkempt. It was clear he hadn't slept either. "The light's fixed now," he said without turning to face her. It was just a short circuit, old wires, nothing to worry about. His tone was brisk, almost rehearsed. Clara wanted to believe him, but something about his words felt hollow, too deliberate. She noticed his hands trembling as he adjusted a screw. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Because last night was nothing," he interrupted. "The sea plays tricks, especially after storms. Forget it." Bramble, the old dog, shuffled in from the kitchen, his fur still damp from the morning mist. He wagged his tail faintly, pressing his head against Clara's leg as if sensing her unease. She knelt to stroke his grizzled fur. "At least you believe me, don't you?" she whispered. The dog gave a soft huff and rested beside her. Elias cleared his throat. "There's a supply boat due today. Brings food and fuel once a month. It'll dock at noon if the tide's good. You can take a ride to town, see the doctor." He said it as though sending her away might also rid him of whatever haunted the night before. Around midday, the fog rolled in, thick and low, swallowing the horizon. From within, it came the faint rumble of an engine. Elias raised a hand to his brow, squinting into the mist. "That'll be Harlan." The man who emerged from the fog a few minutes later was built like the hull of a ship, broad shoulders, weathered skin, and hands calloused from a lifetime at sea. Harlan Pierce was in his late 40s, with sun-beaten skin the color of copper, a short black beard threaded with silver, and eyes as sharp as broken glass. His raincoat was patched and his boots heavy with dried salt. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd faced the ocean's worst moods and survived. Yet behind that ruggedness was an odd kindness, a man who had learned humility through hardship. He greeted Elias with a curt nod. "Brought your rations and kerosene, old man. Seas were rough this morning." Elias grunted, taking the supplies in silence. Harlan noticed Clara then, standing by the stairs. "Didn't know you had company," he said, a hint of curiosity softening his tone. "New helper?" Clara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Elias spoke before she could. "Just passing through. Storm caught her out." Harlan's gaze lingered on her for a moment, then softened when he noticed her pregnancy. "You should be resting, not climbing cliffs in this weather," he said kindly. His voice carried the easy authority of a man used to giving advice, not orders. "The nearest doctor's in Gulhaven, about 20 minutes down the coast by boat. I can take you if you like." Clara glanced at Elias, who gave a small nod. "Go," he said. "You need to be seen." The boat ride through the fog was eerily quiet. The only sounds were the chugging of the old engine and the rhythmic lap of waves against the hull. Clara sat wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled faintly of fish and diesel. Harlan kept his eyes on the horizon, hands steady on the wheel. "You picked a strange place to stop," he said after a while. "That lighthouse hasn't had visitors in years." "Elias said it's been his home for a long time," Clara replied. "Since the accident?" Harlan murmured. "You don't know, do you?" She turned to him. "What accident?" He hesitated before answering, lowering his voice as though the mist might carry his words back to the lighthouse. 15 years ago, there was a shipwreck just off the point, the Meredith Dawn, caught in a storm. Elias was on duty, but they say the light went out for nearly an hour. The ship hit the rocks. Everyone aboard drowned. His wife and little girl were on that ship. Visiting him, they said, he's never left the place since. Clara felt her heart twist painfully. The journal's words, "forgive him," echoed in her mind. "That's terrible," she whispered. Harlan said, tightening his grip on the wheel. "The sea takes what it wants. But Elias, he took the blame harder than anyone. Some folks say he still sees them when the fog's thick. I say grief makes ghosts of us all." The town of Goalhaven appeared out of the mist like a painting fading into view. Rows of slate-roofed cottages, fishing boats rocking at the dock, and a narrow street that climbed toward a church on the hill. The people here moved slowly, bundled in coats, their faces wind-chapped and tired. The doctor's office sat above the harbor, marked by a brass plaque dulled by salt. Dr. Nathaniel Alcott was a thin man in his 60s, with wisps of white hair and a pair of spectacles perpetually sliding down his nose. His skin was pale and freckled from years spent indoors, and his eyes, though weary, held genuine warmth. He examined Clara gently, asking quiet questions about her health and due date. His voice was slow, deliberate, as though each word was measured, for comfort. "You've been through more than your share of stress," he said finally. "The baby's strong, but you need rest and stability. No more storms, literal or otherwise." He gave her a reassuring smile, the kind that softened the lines around his mouth. "If you're staying with Carrick, he'll look after you. He's a good man. Broken, but good." As she left, he handed her a small tin of herbal salve. "For your nerves," he said. "And tell Elias he still owes me for the last batch of quinine." Harlan waited outside, smoking a pipe and watching the sea roll in. "You're clear," he said when she approached. "Healthy as can be, considering." He helped her back aboard the boat with a gentleness that contrasted his rough exterior. As they set off, Clara asked, "Do you believe in ghosts, Mr. Pierce?" He chuckled softly, the sound half melancholy. "Believe in what you can't see? Out here, that's half of life. Fog hides many things, some better left hidden." By the time they reached the lighthouse, dusk had settled, painting the sea in shades of silver and blue. Elias was waiting by the shore, arms crossed, face unreadable. He helped Clara off the boat without a word, though his touch lingered longer than politeness required. A silent apology, perhaps, for his harshness earlier. Harlan gave a short wave and vanished again into the mist. That night, the fog returned, heavier than before. It pressed against the windows like breath. Clara sat by the fire, the seashell she had found in her pocket. Its surface gleamed faintly in the firelight, and when she lifted it to her ear, she could swear she heard not the sea, but a lullaby, faint, distant, the same melody as before. She turned to Elias, who was sitting across the room, carving a piece of driftwood into the shape of a small bird. His hands were steady now, though his eyes seemed far away. "Did you love her?" Clara asked quietly. He looked up sharply. "Who?" "Mary Ann." His jaw tightened, the muscles working as if he were chewing on the answer. "Love is too small a word for what she was to me," he said finally. "She was, light, and I let it go out." Clara wanted to comfort him, but something in his tone made her stay silent. The clock ticked softly, and the waves outside grew restless again. Near midnight, Bramble began to growl low in his throat. His cloudy eye flicked toward the window. Clara followed his gaze and froze. The mist outside had thickened into shapes. At first, she thought they were tricks of light, but then one moved against the wind, a tall, slender figure draped in white, hair streaming like seaweed. She stood, heart pounding. "Elias," she whispered, "there's someone outside." He turned, following her gaze. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he moved toward the door, grabbing the heavy lantern. "Stay here," he said. But Clara followed anyway, pulling her shawl tight. The air outside was freezing, thick with moisture. The beam from the lantern cut through the fog, illuminating the cliffs and the narrow stretch of beach below. The figure stood near the edge of the surf, half visible through the shifting mist. She was barefoot, wearing what looked like a white nightgown, soaked to the knees. Her hair, a deep auburn, clung to her shoulders. Her skin was pale as moonlight, and when she turned, Clara saw her face, beautiful, serene, but impossibly sad. "Mary Ann," Elias whispered. The woman raised a hand, palm outward, and the wind seemed to still. Her lips moved, but her voice came not as sound, but as a whisper in the mind. "The child. Save the child." Then, like mist before sunrise, she began to fade, her form dissolving into the sea air. Elias stumbled forward, reaching out. "Mary Ann, wait, please." But she was gone. The only sound was the sea, sighing against the rocks. Clara gripped his arm. What did she mean? He shook his head, tears streaking his weathered face. "I don't know," he said hoarsely, "but she's never come this close before." They returned inside, shaken. Elias sat by the fire, staring at his hands as though trying to wash invisible salt from them. "She blames me," he murmured. "She should." Clara touched his shoulder gently. "Maybe she's warning us, not haunting you." Before he could reply, a loud crash echoed from outside, the sound of something heavy striking the rocks. Elias grabbed the lantern and rushed out. Clara followed again, despite fear. Down near the base of the cliff, the tide was pulling back, revealing a shattered wooden crate half buried in sand. Elias waded in to pull it free, his boots sinking into the wet earth. When he pried it open, the lantern light fell upon a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside lay a child's toy, a small carved boat, perfectly preserved despite the years. On its side, etched faintly, was a name, Maris. Elias stared at it as if the world had stopped turning. "That was my daughter's," he whispered. "It went down with the ship." The wind howled suddenly, strong enough to snuff out the lantern. In the darkness, Clara felt the presence again. A cold rush of air, the echo of a lullaby, and the soft whisper of a woman's voice. "The sea keeps what it's owed." Elias fell to his knees, clutching the little boat to his chest, sobbing silently as the fog closed around them. Clara, trembling, looked toward the sea, and for a fleeting moment, she saw a second figure standing beside Mary Ann, a small girl holding her hand, watching them from within the mist. Then both vanished into the waves. The sea had changed again. It no longer whispered, it groaned. The tide heaved against the rocks as if angry at being denied its prize. From the window of her small room, Clara watched the waves curl white beneath the pale dawn, and felt a shiver that had nothing to do with cold. The events of the night before, the apparition in the mist, the carved toy boat marked Maris, and the strange voice that had whispered through the fog, still pressed on her chest like an invisible weight. She hadn't spoken to Elias since they'd come back inside. He had retreated to the lantern room, where the light burned weakly now, as if feeding on his guilt. When she descended the narrow staircase, she found him still there, hunched by the table with the toy boat laid carefully before him. Elias looked hollowed out, his gray beard unkempt, his hands shaking slightly as he polished the little hull with a cloth. "I thought it was gone," he murmured without looking up. "All these years, the sea still knows where to find me." Clara didn't answer. Bramble lay by the hearth, his cloudy eye following her. The old dog gave a low whine, restless, as if sensing a coming storm. "You said her name was Maris," Clara began carefully. Elias nodded, the motion slow, heavy. "She was 5, he said. Bright as morning light, always asking why the sea changes color. Mary Ann used to say she had the ocean in her eyes." His voice faltered. "They were coming out here for her birthday. I'd promised I'd fix the generator before their arrival, so the lamp would never fail again. But the storm came early, and He stopped, his jaw clenching. "I failed them both. The lamp went dark. By the time I got it running again, it was too late. Their ship hit the rocks. Clara hesitated, feeling sympathy twist with unease. Maybe Marianne doesn't blame you. Maybe she's trying to tell you something. Elias gave a bitter laugh. Ghosts don't forgive. They linger because they can't. Later that morning, as she stepped outside for air, Clara saw Harlan's boat cutting through the distance again. He waved, shouting something over the wind, but his words were lost to the surf. When he reached the small dock, she saw a grim expression shadowing his normally calm face. "Storm's rolling in again," he said, tying the rope tight. "Fast and ugly, barometer's dropping. You two need to be ready." Elias appeared behind her, his long coat flapping. "We'll manage," he said shortly. "We always do." Harlan frowned. "You've been saying that for 15 years, Carrick. One day the sea's going to call your bluff." The two men regarded each other in silence for a long moment, like men who'd once been friends but carried too much history between them. Harlan's gaze softened when it landed on Clara. "If the storm turns bad, light the beacon early," he said. "The Coast Guard will keep clear if they see Windmere burning." View reached into his coat and handed her a wrapped parcel. "Rations and blankets, doctor's orders. He said you'll need the warmth soon." He tipped his cap and left, swallowed again by the horizon. Inside, Clara unpacked the parcel: bread, dried fruit, a tin of soup, and a folded note written in Alcott's tidy script. "Stay calm, rest, let Carrick take care of the light, and if anything feels wrong, get to higher ground." The last line made her uneasy. She looked toward the spiral staircase that led to the lamp, where Elias still worked, muttering to himself. By late afternoon, the wind had risen to a steady moan, rattling the windows like warning fingers. The air thickened with the metallic taste of rain. Bramble whined again, pawing at the door. "You feel it too, don't you?" Clara whispered. The dog pressed against her leg, trembling. She tried to distract herself by reading Marianne's journal again. Near the final pages, there was an entry she hadn't seen before, dated the day before the shipwreck. The ink was smudged, but she could still make out the words. "Elias says the sea is jealous of light. It takes what shines too brightly. I've begun to dream of the water calling my name. I fear I know whose voice it really is." Her pulse quickened. The handwriting on that last line was uneven, desperate, as if written while the pen trembled. She traced the words with her fingers. The room suddenly seemed colder. A crash of thunder shook the walls. She startled, closing the book. The lamp above flickered. "Elias!" she called, climbing the steps. He was standing by the window, staring out at the sea. The wind howled around the tower. "The barometer's dropping fast," he muttered. "It's coming sooner than I thought." "What is?" "The storm, or something worse." He turned to her then, his face pale and drawn. "The light's struggling. The generator can't handle this wind. If it goes out again, then fix it," she urged. "You can't let it fail." He gave a dry, humorless smile. "I won't." Hours passed. Rain lashed the glass. The sea had turned black, its waves slamming against the cliffs with the roar of cannon fire. The lighthouse shuddered under the force of it. Clara sat near the fire, holding her belly, as sharp pains began to ripple through her lower body. At first she thought it was nerves, but when the pain returned stronger, she knew. Her time had come too soon. She tried to stand, but nearly fell. "Elias!" she shouted. The thunder drowned her voice. The next contraction seized her like a vice. She screamed this time. Moments later, Elias appeared, soaked and panting. When he saw her doubled over, his expression shifted from fear to determination. "It's early," he said, kneeling beside her. "Too early." "I know," she gasped. He helped her to the cot by the fire. His hands were steady now, his movements sure. "I used to deliver calves on my father's farm," he said quietly. "And Marianne, she was a midwife once. She taught me enough to know what to do." Between contractions, Clara managed a weak laugh. "You really have done everything, haven't you?" "Except the one thing that mattered," he said under his breath. The night stretched endlessly. The storm grew worse. Water leaked through cracks in the window. Bramble lay beside the cot, whining softly every time Clara cried out. Between surges of pain, she saw Elias moving, fetching towels, boiling water, murmuring reassurances he didn't quite believe. Lightning flashed through the windows, illuminating his face, lined, weary, but fierce with purpose. "You're doing well," he told her. "Just keep breathing. You're stronger than you think." The hours blurred together. At some point, the generator faltered, the lamp above flickered, then dimmed. Elias froze, torn between his duty to the light and the woman in labor before him. Clara saw the panic in his eyes. "Go!" she said through clenched teeth. "Fix it. I can't leave you," he protested. "Then both of us die," she snapped. "Go!" He hesitated only a second longer before running up the stairs. The roar of the storm swallowed him. Alone, Clara fought through another wave of pain. The room spun. The world narrowed to the sound of her own breathing and the rhythmic crash of the waves. Then, suddenly, everything stilled. The thunder faded. Even the wind seemed to stop. The air grew heavy with silence. And in that silence, Clara heard it again. The lullaby. Soft, close, tender. A woman's voice humming beside her. When she turned her head, she saw her. Marianne. The apparition stood by the cot, her white gown dry despite the rain that pounded the walls. Her auburn hair glowed faintly in the dim light, and her eyes were filled not with anger, but sorrow. She reached out, her hand resting lightly on Clara's brow. "It's all right," she whispered, her voice a melody that trembled like wind through reeds. "The sea doesn't want this child. She wants peace," Clara sobbed. "Please help me." Marianne nodded. "Breathe. You are not alone." Pain returned, fierce and consuming. But through it all, Clara felt warmth where Marianne's hand touched her. Time lost meaning. The next thing she knew, there was a cry. Thin, fragile, alive. When Elias returned, dripping and exhausted, the lamp burning steady again, he found Clara holding a tiny infant wrapped in a blanket. "It's a girl," she whispered. He sank to his knees, tears spilling freely. "Thank God." "She's small but strong," Clara said, smiling weakly. "I thought I was going to die." He reached out, hesitating before touching the child's cheek. "You won't," he said. "Not while I'm here." The storm outside began to ease. The wind softened into sighs. Elias glanced toward the window, where the mist was thinning. For a moment, he thought he saw two, figures standing beyond the glass, Marianne and little Morris, watching them. Then they were gone, and the horizon began to brighten with dawn. Later, when the fire had burned low, Clara drifted to sleep with the baby on her chest. Elias sat nearby, staring into the flames. The old guilt still lived in him, but something had shifted, a small spark of redemption. He looked at the newborn and whispered, "You'll need a name." Clara murmured, half asleep, "She already has one." "What is it?" "Hope." Elias smiled faintly, the first real smile she'd ever seen on him. "Hope," he repeated. "Yes, that's fitting." Outside, the waves continued their endless rhythm. The lighthouse stood unbroken, its light cutting through the fading mist. For the first time in years, Elias Carrick felt that the sea might finally forgive him. Or perhaps it had already done so in the form of a child born beneath its watchful eye. The years that followed the night of Hope's birth unfolded like the slow turning of the lighthouse beam, steady, rhythmic, and filled with both light and shadow. The storms still came, as they always had, but Windmere Light stood unbroken against them. Time, however, left its quiet mark. The salt air etched deeper lines into Elias Carrick's face, and the white in his beard spread until no trace of gray remained. His movements became slower, his breath heavier, yet his eyes, those pale blue eyes that once reflected only guilt, now carried something gentler, peace. Hope grew quickly, a small miracle wrapped in laughter. By the time she turned 5, she had her mother's dark hair and Marianne's green hazel eyes. She was small for her age, but quick, with a curious mind and a habit of asking questions faster than anyone could answer them. She followed Elias everywhere, from the tool shed to the lamp room, her tiny boots echoing on the metal stairs. He'd grumble about young feet on old stairs, but the smile beneath his beard always gave him away. Clara had changed too. Motherhood had softened the fear that once haunted her. Her hair, longer now, framed a face no longer pale with anxiety, but warm and full of quiet strength. The town of Gulhaven, which had once seemed distant and suspicious, had grown to know her as the woman of the lighthouse. She helped Harlan with supply logs, traded herbs with the widows, and occasionally worked alongside Dr. Alcott, who had grown fond of Hope's endless chatter. Every evening, the lighthouse came alive again. Elias would light the great lamp, Hope standing at his side, eyes wide as the beams swept over the sea. "Remember this, little one," he'd say, placing a gnarled hand on her shoulder. "The light doesn't just warn sailors, it reminds them there's still something worth finding." Hope would nod solemnly and repeat, "The light must never go out." By the time she was 6, it had become her favorite phrase. One summer evening, as the sun bled orange over the horizon, a carriage approached from the hill road, a rare sight at Windermere. The horse's coat gleamed dark and smooth, and the man holding the reins looked distinctly out of place against the wild landscape. He was in his mid-30s, tall and lean, with neatly trimmed blonde hair and a sharp jawline that spoke of careful grooming. His gray wool coat was travel-stained but expensive, his hands gloved in leather. His name was Mr. Edmund Price, a solicitor from London. His eyes, pale gray, assessing, missed nothing. Elias met him at the door with polite suspicion. "You're a long way from any city that matters," he said. Mr. Price removed his gloves carefully, as though even the salt air might soil them. "I'm here on behalf of the Maritime Council," he said, his voice clipped, professional. "There's been talk of automating the coastal lights. Windermere, I believe, is among the oldest still operated. By hand, I've come to discuss arrangements." Elias's expression hardened. "The light stays as it is. She's done her duty." "Regrettably, progress doesn't consult sentiment," Price replied smoothly. "Still, I'd rather not begin with conflict. Might I speak with you? Alone?" Clara appeared behind Elias, her hands dusted with flour from baking. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of us," she said firmly. Her tone left no room for debate. Price studied her for a moment, then inclined his head slightly. "Very well. It's a matter of maintenance funds, you see. The council plans to install a new electric system by year's end. You'd still be caretaker, of course, if you agreed to a contract." "I've kept this light with my own hands for 40 years, Elias said. "No contract can tell me how to do that." The tension hung heavy in the air. Hope peeked from behind her mother's skirt, watching the exchange. "Are you here to break our light?" she asked suddenly. Mr. Price blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "No, little one," he said, softening slightly. "I'm here to make sure it keeps shining, in a new way." Elias's voice was low. "There's nothing wrong with the old way." Seeing the conversation was going nowhere, Price bowed curtly. "Very well, I'll return in a fortnight. Perhaps time will lend perspective." He tipped his hat and turned to leave. That night, after Hope had gone to bed, Clara sat by the fire, watching Elias sharpen his tools with unusual care. "You know they'll replace it, eventually," she said gently. "You can't fight the whole world." Elias didn't look up. "I'm not fighting the world, just the parts of it that forget what matters." Outside, the wind began to rise. The scent of rain drifted through the cracks in the windows. The dog, Bramble, older and slower now, lifted his head and gave a low, uneasy growl. Clara glanced at him. "He doesn't like storms anymore." "Neither do I," Elias murmured. The storm came fast, with a violence that felt almost familiar. The sea roared against the cliffs, and the lighthouse creaked with each gust. Hope, half asleep, whimpered from her small bed. Clara hurried to her, whispering, "It's all right, my love. The light's burning. We're safe." But then the generator coughed, once, twice. The beam flickered and went dark. Elias was already on the stairs before Clara could speak. His boots struck metal as he climbed, the old pain of memory clenched in his chest. He reached the lamp room, fighting the wind that had forced the hatch ajar. Rain lashed his face. He reached the generator housing and found the wires sparking, salt water having seeped through the cracks. His fingers moved by instinct, his breath ragged. "Not again," he muttered. "You'll not take her light again." Downstairs, Clara cradled Hope as thunder split the sky. Then, through the roar, came a sound like a whisper carried on the wind. "The sea keeps what it's owed." Clara froze. The voice was not the storm's. It was soft, female, mournful. Mary Ann's. "Elias!" she called, but above, something strange was happening. The lamp reignited, bright, blinding. Elias stepped back, shielding his eyes. The glow wasn't from the generator. It was too pure, too white. For a moment, he saw them again. Mary Ann and little Maurice standing within the light, smiling. But this time, there was no sorrow in their faces, only peace. Mary Ann's voice echoed softly through the roar. "You kept your promise." Elias sank to his knees, tears mingling with rain. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything." Mary Ann shook her head gently. "The sea forgave you long ago. You were the only one who couldn't." She glanced toward the stairs. "Look after them." The light pulsed once, like a heartbeat, then steadied. The figures vanished, leaving the lamp burning stronger than ever. When Elias came down, drenched and trembling, Clara saw the change in him. The years of grief seemed to lift from his shoulders. "She's gone," he said softly. "Gone home." That night, the storm subsided. In the morning, the sea lay calm, the air clear. Harlan arrived at dawn, his boat gliding easily over the still water. "Thought I'd find the place torn apart," he said, stepping onto the dock. Then he paused, squinting at the beam above. "But damn if that isn't the brightest light I've ever seen." Elias smiled faintly. "She has help, I think." A week later, Mr. Price returned, as promised, to deliver the council's papers. He found Elias waiting outside with a small box in his hands. "You can tell your council the lighthouse is no longer theirs," Elias said. "It belongs to her." Price frowned. "To whom?" Elias gestured to Hope, who stood beside her mother, the wind tugging at her hair. "To the next keeper." Price looked uncertain, as though unsure if the old man was jesting. "That's not how ownership works," he said. Elias handed him the box. "Inside you'll find the deed and a note. Tell them Windmere's light doesn't need their wires. It runs on something older." Price, realizing argument was useless, nodded curtly and departed. That evening, Elias climbed the stairs one final time. Clara followed, carrying Hope in her arms. The old man stood beside the great lamp, his hand resting on the rail. "I think I've done enough keeping for one lifetime," he said. Clara frowned. "Don't talk like that." He smiled. "It's not farewell, just passing the torch." He looked down at Hope, who stared up at him with solemn eyes. "Remember what I told you?" "The light must never go out," she whispered. He nodded. "That's right. No matter what happens, promise me you'll keep it burning." "I promise," she said. That night, Elias went to sleep by the fire, Bramble's head resting on his lap. When morning came, the fire had burned to embers, and both were still. Clara found them there, peaceful, the dawn light spilling over his weathered face. His hand still held the tiny carved boat marked Maris. The lighthouse keeper was gone. Years later, travelers approaching the coast would speak of Windmere Light, the beacon that never faltered. Some said it ran on an old system. Others claimed it glowed without fuel at all. Locals knew better. They said the light was kept by a woman and her daughter, and on foggy nights when the mist curled around the tower, you could sometimes hear a man's laughter and a dog's soft bark carried on the wind. And when Hope grew older and her own daughter stood beside her in the lamp room, she would tell her the story the same way Elias once had. The light doesn't just warn sailors, it reminds them there's still something worth finding. In the end, the lighthouse's promise is not just a story about storms, ghosts, or a lonely keeper. It is about forgiveness, faith, and the quiet miracles that happen when we refuse to let our light go out. Sometimes God doesn't speak through thunder or fire. He speaks through endurance, through a mother's courage, through a flicker of hope that refuses to die. Every one of us has a lighthouse inside, the ability to bring light to others even when our own hearts are breaking. If you believe in second chances, in grace that arrives when we least deserve it, then remember this. No matter how dark your sea may seem, God's light will always find you. May the Lord bless all who watch this story tonight. May His light guide your path, comfort your storms, and keep your hope alive. If you feel touched by this story, don't forget to share it, leave a comment, subscribe, and may His peace stay with you always.